My son said, "You're not my real dad. Mom's yoga guy is better." I said, "Okay." Then I stopped the Culinary Academy payments and sold his sports bike. 72 hours later, his mother was threatening legal action. The thing I remember most was the look on Nick's face that night. His eyes were bright, almost feverish, as he said it. "Brett understands me better than you do, Dad. He's my real father figure." I didn't flinch. I didn't let him see how much that cut me. I just gave a small nod and said, "Okay. My name is Tom. I'm 43 years old and I live in Santa Monica, California. I've been running my own restaurant, the Copper Pot, for the past 15 years. Ever since Lana walked out on us, I've raised Nick on my own. She left when he was 8, ran off to Arizona with some yoga instructors she met at a retreat. For years, it was just me and Nick against the world. When she showed up again last month, I could feel the ground shifting under my feet. She was all smiles and carefully chosen words, bringing Brett along like he was some kind of prize. Brett, tall, tan, always in expensive gym clothes, with that rented Porsche and the endless promises of YouTube glory. I tried to be civil. I thought maybe Nick would see through the showy kindness, the constant selfies and fake spiritual quotes. I was wrong. Nick came home that Sunday evening, threw his backpack on the floor, and looked me dead in the eye. "Dad, Brett's got connections. He says he can help me become a content creator. He said you're too stuck in the past to understand. Brett gets me. He's my real father figure." I didn't say anything for a minute. I just took in the words, let them echo in my head. My hands were steady on the kitchen counter, but my chest felt like someone had punched me right in the heart. "Okay," I said finally, and turned back to the stove. Dinner was already burning, but I didn't care. "Okay." Nick didn't seem to notice the hurt in my voice. He just shrugged and went in his room, already texting Brett about their next collab. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Nick had gone to bed. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whoosh of cars on the street outside. I thought about all those years, every scraped knee, every parent-teacher conference, every early morning practice. I thought about the way he used to curl up next to me on the couch when he was little, how he'd say, "You're the best, Dad." And now, just like that, I was nobody, just some guy who paid the bills. I didn't sleep much. Around midnight, I pulled out the laptop and logged into Nick's tuition account. His Culinary Academy wasn't cheap, but I wasn't going to pay for a kid who didn't want me in his life. I canceled the payments, typed in my password with fingers that were shaking. Then I made a few calls, found a buyer for the sports bike I'd given Nick for his 16th birthday. It was a sleek Kawasaki, bright red, and Nick had loved it like it was a living thing. By dawn, the paperwork was done. The tuition payments were gone. The bike was as good as sold. I stood in the living room, watching the first light of morning creep in through the window. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of calm, like I'd finally decided to stop trying so damn hard. When Nick woke up that morning, he found me in the kitchen, sipping coffee. "Hey," he said, looking a little unsure. I looked up at him and just said, "Morning." He hesitated like he wanted to say something more, but he didn't. He just poured himself some cereal and sat down, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. I wondered if he'd ever realize what he'd lost, what we'd both lost, but I wasn't going to beg for his love. Not anymore. When I got to the restaurant that Monday morning, the kitchen was already busy, the clatter of pans and the smell of bacon and fresh bread filling the air. I barely noticed it. My mind was still back home, stuck on the look on Nick's face when I told him over breakfast. I didn't raise my voice or even sound angry. I just said, "I canceled your tuition payments, Nick. You've got 5 days to figure out how you're going to stay in that academy." He stared at me like he didn't understand. "You can't do that. I need that place. It's my future." I shrugged. "Then you'd better figure it out." At work, I made the call to the Culinary Academy myself, told them to expect no more checks from me. The woman on the other end sounded surprised, but polite. I explained it was a family matter, and that was that. 5 days. That's what Nick had left. I didn't go home right away that night. I stayed at the Copper Pot, busying myself with inventory orders and the dinner rush. Anything to avoid seeing the disappointment, or worse, the pleading in Nick's eyes. But when I did finally walk through the front door, he was waiting for me. He stood there in the living room, arms crossed over his chest. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying. "Dad, you can't just pull the rug out from under me like this," he said, voice shaking. I didn't mean what I said about Brett. I was just mad. I didn't mean it. I set my keys down on the counter and took a long breath. "I'm not punishing you for being mad. I'm holding you to your words. You said I wasn't your real father figure, that I didn't understand you. If that's true, then my money shouldn't matter either." Nick's face crumpled. "That's not fair. You know that's not what I meant." I shook my head. "Nick, if I'm just some guy who pays the bills, then my money isn't your right. You can't have it both ways." He looked at me for a long moment, like he was trying to find the right words. Then he just turned and stomped up the stairs, slamming the door to his room behind him. I heard the muffled thump of his backpack hitting the wall. It took everything I had not to follow him and say I was sorry, that I'd fix it. But I didn't. I just let the silence settle. A couple days later, I finalized the sale of the Kawasaki. A kid from the next town overpaid cash for it. When he revved it up in the driveway, I could feel the loss like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. I watched him ride away, the roar of the engine fading down the street. Meanwhile, my phone kept lighting up with messages from Lana. She'd apparently heard from Nick and wasn't wasting any time letting me know how she felt. Tom, how could you do this? You're destroying his future. He's your son, for God's sake. Another one. You're going to regret this. You're making him hate you. I didn't reply to a single one. I read them all, let them sit there in my inbox like little bombs that never went off. I wasn't going to fight with her. Let her think what she wanted. One night that week, Nick came down late, after I thought he was asleep. He found me at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop but not really seeing the screen. Dad, he said, his voice small. I don't want to lose that school. I don't want to lose us. For a second, I almost caved, but I remembered the look on his face when he said Brett was his real father figure. That look cut deeper than any of Lana's angry texts ever could. You need to decide, Nick, I said quietly, who's really in your corner? And if it's not me, then you need to figure out how to stand on your own. He didn't say anything else, just turned and went back upstairs, the weight of the words hanging in the air long after he was gone. The next day, he didn't go to the academy. He spent the day in his room, probably calling everyone he could think of, trying to scrape together the money. But I didn't ask. It was his problem to solve now. I went to bed that night with a strange kind of calm in my chest, like I'd finally stopped chasing something I was never going to catch. The Friday after I cut Nick off, Lana showed up at my restaurant. She didn't come alone. She brought Fiona, her older sister, and Brett's mother, Sylvia. They all looked like they'd stepped out of some fancy brunch in Malibu, hair perfectly done and sunglasses perched on their heads like crowns. I was in the kitchen when Maria, my hostess, popped her head in. Tom, she said quietly, you've got visitors. I sighed, wiping my hands on a towel. I stepped out, and there they were at a corner table, huddled like they were planning a coup. Tom, Lana said, standing up the moment she saw me. We need to talk. I raised an eyebrow. Lana, I'm working. If you want to talk, you'll have to wait until the lunch rush is over. Fiona rolled her eyes. Oh, don't be dramatic, Tom. This is about Nick's future. You can spare 5 minutes for your son. I motioned for Maria to bring them coffee and sat down across from them. Fine, I said. Say what you need to say. Sylvia, who I'd never really spoken to much before, leaned in first. Tom, in our family, we don't believe in punishing kids for saying stupid things. He's young. He made a mistake. You're cutting him off over a few harsh words. I watched her carefully, noting the expensive bracelets jingling on her wrist as she spoke. Nick is old enough to know what he's saying. He wanted Brett as his father figure. That's his choice. Lana cut in, her voice brittle. Oh, come on, Tom. You're being cruel. He was upset. He said something stupid. Now he's going to lose his dream because of your pride. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Is Brett paying for his schooling then? For his dreams? Lana flinched. Brett can't afford that right now. But hey, I held up a hand. Then it's simple. Nick chose who he wanted to be his father. If I'm not it, then my money isn't his right. I'm not punishing him. I'm making room for the father figure he picked. Sylvia let out a sigh, like she'd finally decided I was hopeless. This is petty, Tom. You're humiliating your own son. You're driving him away. I didn't react, just shrugged. Maybe he needs to learn what it feels like to be on his own for a while. Fiona leaned forward, her eyes sharp. You're going to ruin his life over your ego. I felt a flicker of anger, but I kept my voice calm. No, I'm letting him feel the consequences of his choices. He decided who he wanted in his life. He said it loud and clear. Now he has to live with it. That was when Brett showed up. He breezed in wearing his workout gear, like he'd just come from the gym, sunglasses hanging from his shirt collar. He looked around, gave me that smug, easy smile. Tom, man, come on, he said, sliding into the seat next to Lana. Nick's just a kid. You can't expect him to mean everything he says when he's upset. I looked at Brett, really looked at him. The perfect teeth, the carefully tousled hair. Everything about him was an act. He's not a kid anymore, I said evenly. He's 17, old enough to know what words mean, old enough to know who he's calling his father figure. Brett's smile faltered just a little. Look, I'm just trying to help him out, show him some new opportunities. He wants to be a creator, not stuck in some old restaurant kitchen his whole life. I let that sink in. You wanted to be his father figure, Brett? Great. Step up, pay for his school, buy his books, cover his living expenses. For a second, the table went quiet. Even Sylvia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Brett's face turned a little red. I can't do that, he muttered. I'm just here to support him emotionally, you know? I nodded slowly. Good to know. I stood up, giving each of them a steady look. I'm done having this conversation. Nick made his choice. I'm not changing mine. Lana's face twisted, her voice rising. Tom, you're making a huge mistake. He'll never forgive you for this. I shrugged. Maybe, but I'm done paying for someone who doesn't see me as a father. I turned and walked back into the kitchen. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I knew they'd all keep pushing, keep talking about family and responsibility. But for once, I wasn't listening. I was done being the guy everyone else leaned on. It was Saturday morning when the video went up. I was at the restaurant early, prepping for brunch service, when my phone buzzed with a notification from Nick's account. I clicked the link. He was sitting in his room, the curtains drawn tight. His voice was low, a little shaky, like he was trying to sound more vulnerable than he really felt. My dad's been punishing me, he said. He's cutting me off because I wanted to spend time with my mom and Brett. He's making me leave my school. I don't know what I did to deserve this. He sniffed, looking straight at the camera like a kid in a soap opera. All I wanted was to follow my dreams, but he doesn't care. He doesn't see how much this means to me. It was manipulative, calculated, and it worked. Within an hour, the video had hundreds of comments, some of them from people we both knew. A girl who used to work at the restaurant posted, "Wow, Tom? I always thought he was such a great guy." Another wrote, "Parents like that are the reason kids leave home." But there were others, people who knew me better, who saw through it all. My friend Jenna, who runs the bakery down the street, left a comment that just said, "Not the whole story, kid." My brother David even called me an hour later, his voice calm, but with that edge I knew too well. "You want me to set the record straight?" he asked. "I can post something. People need to hear the truth." I hesitated. "No," I said finally. "Let it play out. Nick's gotta learn that actions have consequences, even on social media." "Your call," David said, "but I'm here if you change your mind." Meanwhile, Lana's friends started flooding my phone. Messages from women I barely knew, telling me how cruel I was. How could I let my son's future be destroyed like this? They didn't know the years I spent picking up the pieces when Lana walked away. They didn't know the nights I sat up worrying about Nick when she was off finding herself at some retreat. Brett, of course, couldn't help but get in on the action. He posted a picture of himself in a yoga pose, captioned, "Real dads show up. Real dads support their kids' dreams." I nearly laughed out loud at that one. He'd never shown up for anything real in his life. The restaurant was slammed that weekend. We had a line out the door, people talking and laughing and clinking glasses. It was exactly what I needed. I kept my phone on silent, let the world keep spinning outside. That night, after the rush died down, I sat on the back step of the restaurant and just breathed. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another message from Lana. "You're ruining his life, Tom. You're turning your own son against you. How do you sleep at night?" I didn't reply. I watched the sun sink behind the buildings, the sky turning dark and cool, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. I was done trying to win a game I didn't even want to play. Nick could post all he wanted. He could tell whatever story he wanted to tell. But the real story, our story, wasn't his to twist. He'd learn that eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. It was Monday morning when my friend and lawyer, Pete, called me. I was brewing the first pot of coffee at the restaurant when his name popped up on the screen. "You're not going to believe this," Pete said, sounding half amused and half disgusted. "Lana just filed for emergency custody modification." I set the coffee pot down, feeling a flash of irritation. "She what?" "She's claiming you're financially neglecting Nick," Pete said. I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Apparently, she's arguing that because you cut him off, you're not meeting his needs. She's even saying it's causing him emotional distress." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Jesus. So what happens now?" Pete chuckled. "Nothing, Tom. The judge dismissed it immediately. Said luxury schooling isn't a basic need for a 17-year-old. You're well within your rights." I let out a long breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thanks, Pete." "No problem," he said, his tone shifting back to calm and professional. "Look, she's going to keep throwing everything she can at you. Just stay the course." I hung up and leaned against the counter, the weight of the past few weeks settling into my shoulders. Nick was still at home. He'd been holed up in his room most days, barely speaking to me. When I walked in that night, he was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "Dad," he said when he saw me, "I tried everything. The culinary school says I'm out if I don't pay by tomorrow. You can't just let that happen. You're ruining my life." I didn't react right away. I set my keys down, took a deep breath. "Nick," I said, my voice calm, "I didn't ruin anything. You chose this." He looked up, his eyes desperate. "I was just trying to get you to listen. I didn't mean what I said about Brett. You're still my dad, in the ways that count." I felt that flicker of old hurt, but I didn't let it show. "If I'm just some guy to you, then my money isn't your right. You have to find your own way now." He didn't have anything to say to that. He just sat there, staring at the floor like he was finally seeing the edge of the cliff he'd been dancing on. The next day, he got the email from the academy. He was officially dropped. I watched him pack up his chef's knives and textbooks, his dreams slipping away like water through his fingers. That night, he didn't come home for dinner. I didn't ask where he went. Instead, I went out back and started the smoker, something I hadn't done in months. The scent of hickory and mesquite filled the air, and I let it settle the noise in my head. Cooking for the restaurant was one thing, but cooking for myself, for nobody but me, that was something I'd almost forgotten how to do. By the time the brisket was done, the sky was dark and the stars were out. I sat there alone in the quiet, thinking about all the ways we'd gotten here, all the ways I'd tried to keep Nick's world perfect, even when mine was falling apart. But this wasn't about me anymore. It was about him learning that choices have consequences, that words matter. And maybe, just maybe, he'd figure that out before it was too late. It was late Tuesday night when I found the note on the kitchen table. The house was quiet. No music, no TV, just the faint hum of the fridge and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. The note was written in Nick's messy scrawl, the words cramped and uneven. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I let Mom and Brett tell me things I wanted to hear because it felt good to be wanted by them. I thought they'd make everything easier, but they didn't. You've always been there, even when I didn't want you to be. I messed up. I'm so sorry." I read it twice, my eyes tracing the shaky lines. Then I set it down and took a deep breath. The weight of it all, the pain and betrayal, started to loosen just a little. A few days later, he came downstairs in the middle of the afternoon. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his hair a mess, his eyes ringed with dark circles. "Dad," "Can we talk?" he said quietly. I nodded. "Yeah, let's sit." We took our usual spots at the kitchen table, me with my coffee mug, him with his hands clenched in his lap. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then he took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I was stupid. I wanted to believe Mom and Brett because they made it sound so easy, like I could just be this online star, and everything would be perfect." He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. I thought if I didn't need you, I'd be my own man, but I was just trying to prove something, and now I've lost everything." I sat there, listening, letting him get it out. "I didn't mean it," he said again, his shoulders shaking. "When I said Brett was my real father figure, I just wanted to hurt you because I was angry that you didn't believe in me, and I didn't want to admit that you always have." I reached across the table and laid my hand on his. "Nick, wanting to find your own way doesn't make you a bad son, but you let yourself believe people who only wanted to use you, and that's not the same as finding your way." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I know that now. Brett and Mom, they said they'd help me, but it was all just talk. When the money ran out, they stopped answering my calls. I was so stupid." I squeezed his hand. "You're not stupid, Nick. You're young, and you learn the hard way that not everyone who calls themselves family is actually family." We sat there for a long time, the silence between us soft instead of heavy. Eventually, he looked up at me, his voice hoarse. "Do you still want me here? Even after everything?" I nodded. "Of course I do, but you have to earn back my trust. It's not a punishment. It's a chance to show me you mean what you say." He swallowed hard and nodded. "I will. I promise." Later that night, I made dinner for us. Nothing fancy, just some pasta with garlic bread. We didn't talk much while we ate, but for the first time in weeks, there wasn't any tension hanging over the table, just the quiet relief of two people trying to find their way back to each other. Afterward, we sat in the living room, Nick flipping through a car magazine while I read the paper. Every once in a while, he'd look up and smile, and I'd smile back. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A week later, I surprised Nick with a used scooter I found through a friend of mine at the restaurant. It was red and a little scuffed up, but it ran well enough, and I could see the spark in his eyes the moment he saw it. "You're giving this to me?" he asked, his voice small, hopeful. I nodded. "It's for you to get to school and back, but it's your responsibility now, Nick. Gas, maintenance, everything." He ran his hands over the handlebars, his fingers tracing the scratches and dents like they were battle scars. "I'll take care of it," he said quietly. "I swear." "Good," I said, "because that's what being a man means. You show up, you keep your word, you don't take more than you're willing to earn." Nick nodded again, and for the first time in what felt like years, I believed him. The shift back to public school wasn't easy for him. He was the new kid, the one who used to go to a fancy academy, and he didn't talk about it much. But one night over dinner, he mentioned a girl he'd met, Jenna, with bright eyes and a laugh that seemed to knock down some of the walls he'd built around himself. "She's into engineering," he said, his voice catching with something like excitement. "She wants to build race cars one day." I grinned. "Sounds like you've got something in common then." He smiled back, and I could see the weight lifting off his shoulders a little. Maybe the culinary dream was gone, but something new was growing in its place. And maybe that was okay. Meanwhile, Lana's life was unraveling like a cheap sweater. She called me once to say she was moving in with her sister. Brett had been arrested. Turns out he'd been selling fake supplements to his online followers, and the Porsche wasn't even his. Nick told me later, shaking his head. He always said he was all about honesty and authenticity. I didn't say anything to that. Some lessons you have to learn on your own. At home, Nick and I started finding a new rhythm. Saturday mornings were for chores. Nick cleaning the scooter, me fixing the squeaky hinge on the back door. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't need to. It was there, a silent reminder of where we'd been and where we didn't want to go again. One morning, over a quiet breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, he looked up at me and said, "I'm glad we're okay now." I looked at him, my heart feeling too big for my chest. "Me too, kiddo. Me too." And just like that, the air between us shifted. The anger and the hurt that had sat between us like a wall started to crumble. We didn't need to say everything. We just needed to keep showing up for each other, one small step at a time. Outside, the world kept moving, cars rushing past on the street, the restaurant filling up with customers who had no idea how close I'd come to losing the one thing that really mattered. But inside, it was quiet and safe, the kind of quiet that felt like hope. I knew it wouldn't always be this easy. There would be days when Nick slipped up, or when I wanted to protect him too much. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were both ready to fight for it, to build something real again, brick by brick. And that was enough for me. That was everything.